The former executive editor of the New York Times, Jill Abramson, criticizing that newspaper in her upcoming book, calling the Times news coverage unmistakably anti-Trump. Let's bring in Howard Kurtz, Fox News media analyst and host of Media Buzz. She's not going to be making a lot of friends among her former colleagues at the New York Times with a lot of what she has to say in this book, Howie.
Absolutely not, John. But this is an extraordinary rebuke by Jill Abramson, the former executive editor, as you say. She not only calls the news coverage unmistakably anti-Trump, she says the younger staff there, the woke staff members, as she puts it, are so concerned about what they see as the dangers of Trump's presidency that they want to throw out the old journalistic standards. She also says that given the paper's mostly liberal audience, there's a financial reward for the Times in running so many stories about Trump, almost all of them negative, and that is soaring traffic. So I think that while Jill Abramson is no fan of President Trump and still obviously loves the New York Times despite her firing 4 years ago, she is calling out the paper in no uncertain terms for the coverage of the president.
Well, the president has said that he helps the New York Times, as he calls it, this is his quote, the failing New York Times. He helps them sell papers, and there is actually some evidence of that.
Yeah, no, the president, despite his war on what he calls the fake news media, actually rings cash registers for a lot of news outlets. In the case of the Times, in just the first 6 months of his presidency, digital subscriptions soared by 600,000 to a total of more than 2 million. It's undoubtedly higher today, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should program or you should practice your journalism in order to make more money when it comes to being fair. Now, some may say this is sour grapes on the part of Jill Abramson because she's criticizing her successor, Dean Baquet, who was her managing editor, who played a role in her firing. But there are times in this book, Merchants of Truth, where she praises Baquet, and I think she's just, you know, taking a step back and saying, hey, if you're constantly running stories that are anti-Trump, you're going to be perceived that way. And in some cases, she says the news pages are just peddling raw opinion.
Let me read part of what she has to say in that new book, which, as you point out, is not out yet. She says, she writes, the more anti-Trump the Times was perceived to be, the more it was mistrusted for being biased. Interesting take there.
Yeah, and I think this is a problem for a number of news organizations. You know, they see themselves as holding the president accountable. Obviously, they see themselves as operating in an environment in which the president is constantly denouncing them and sometimes using phrases that I don't agree with, like enemy of the American people. But to the extent that they are caught up in constant negativity, some stories are legitimate, obviously. Some reporters at the New York Times are fair and try to do a good job. But that is clearly the perception. It does hurt their credibility in ways I don't think they fully appreciate. And here you have Jill Abramson, you know, don't take it from me, take it from the former editor of the New York Times saying this is hurting her former newspaper.
Yeah, the president is out with a tweet regarding the news media this year, telling us that we should get ready for, well, enjoying the ride, he says. And again, he gigs the press. The Wall Street Journal, in a piece last week, said that his attacks on the press are sometimes contemptible, but says that, you know, it's a constant spin zone. That's the headline to that piece. How one publication reported Trump's trip to see troops in Iraq, and it points out that the Times wrote about his trip to Iraq and brought up all of the controversies that were bedeviling him, as if he was doing it only as a dodge.
That was actually an example pointed out by the Journal of the Washington Post, which ran a lead about President Trump touching down in Iraq after announcing a victory over ISIS that his own Pentagon and State Department said remained incomplete. Yeah. It's fine to point that out. When you put it in the lead, it's kind of like this President Trump under fire for being increasingly unhinged said today. It undercuts, you know, you're not even giving the readers or the viewers, John, a kind of a first shot at what the president says. And then if you want to bring in context or quote critics, I think that's fine. When you do it in the very first sentence of the story, and there's a lot of that going on, I think it does undermine our collective credibility. I was glad the president said Happy New Year, though, to the fake news media. Happy New Year to you, Mr. President.
All right. Howard Kurtz, we'll see you on Media Buzz. Thanks, Howie.
Good to see you.